the sunny southern town of Augusta, Georgia, a dark legend looms.
Some people believe that if you touch it, you'll die.
An old stone column, once a part of a thriving marketplace, is now an artifact of evil.
It's right out of the Old Testament. Divine sanction that wipes out entire races of people.
This story tells of an otherworldly element that blows into town.
It touched down a little after 1 a.m. in the morning. That's when the devastation took part.
And settles in the only remaining relic of the storm.
Since that point, people have tried to move or touch the pillar and have died.
You are all doomed!
And the good people of Augusta are left to cope with its curse for years to come.
And when the men tried to move the pillar, both were struck by lightning and both died.
Every day I'd wake up and I'd get a fever. And it got so high that a couple times I started hallucinating.
I believe my grandfather died believing in the curse.
Augusta, Georgia is a picturesque southern town, and its many landmarks help to tell stories of a rich and colorful past. But while most statues depict triumphs, one weaves a twisted tale of divine destruction.
I would never touch the haunted pillar. I might stand near it, but I'm not gonna touch it.
I'm not the one to tempt fate, so I'd just rather leave it alone and not touch it. I mean, I'll look at it, oh, it's nice, it's history, but touching it or going near it, I'd rather not.
According to historian and guide Michael Wolff, the people of Augusta have good reason to be scared.
The legend of the haunted pillar is that if you try to move it, or if you touch it, then something bad will happen to you.
This recurring phenomenon dates back centuries to the very first time that someone tried to move the accursed column. Back in 1878, this area was a thriving marketplace, but when a natural disaster occurs, a single stone pillar is the only remaining remnant.
In 1879, the pillar was standing alone, just kind of out there in the middle of nothing.
As the only surviving structure from the doomed marketplace, folks are convinced the pillar is cursed. No one has dared to move it, until one brave soul sees a business opportunity.
There was a local grocer by the name of Theodore I. He knew about the legend that was involved with it. He thought it would be a great idea to be able to draw attention to his grocery business.
And he's off to a good start because word of the stunt travels fast.
He paid $50 and had two gentlemen that were going to move the pillar for him. It was supposed to be a beautiful, bright, sunny day. There was a crowd that had gathered. They were standing by the road and watching these gentlemen pull this pillar down with these ropes. The skies began to kind of darken a little bit. Just out of nowhere, a bolt of lightning came down and hit the pillar. And as a result, the two gentlemen were killed.
Now, once and for all, everyone's fears are confirmed. The column is cursed. And if anyone thought that perhaps this incident was an unfortunate coincidence, the legend of the haunted pillar is proven again just decades later.
For every 20 or so people that won't touch it, there's usually one person that will tempt fate. In 1940, we had an out-of-towner that came into Augusta.
He had asked the locals about the pillar on the corner of the busy intersection, and that's when he learned about the legend itself.
And according to the story, he laughed when he heard the legend of the pillar. So he decided he was going to prove that legend wrong. It is said that he put a chain around the pillar, connected it to his car, got into the car, hit the accelerator.
When he tried to speed off, it didn't work. The pillar remained standing.
So he got out and he tried to push the pillar. That didn't work.
So he got back in his truck, laughed about it, and drove off.
And according to the legend, that man immediately was involved in a car accident and died.
From that point on, after the accident in 1940, it became known as the Killer Pillar.
The curse of the pillar is simple, but the twisted origins of this legend are complex. Standing alone on the corner of 5th and Broad Streets, it's hard to imagine that this lone column was once part of a grand structure.
This pillar was on the front of the Lower Market building.
During this time, it was the cultural heart of Augusta. As a professor of Southern history, Leanne Caldwell has studied how this impressive building was a symbol of Augusta's booming economy.
The market had been built in the 1820s. It was basically like a Greek revival structure across the front with 4 columns.
The sturdy building served as the gateway to a bustling place of commerce.
It was one of the busiest places in Augusta at that time. People were drawn to it. This was their source for vegetables, for produce, livestock. A lot of tobacco and cotton was being traded and sold that time.
People had stalls, and there would have been grocers and farmers who brought their goods to them.
The Lower Market wasn't just a place for Augustans to shop. It was also where they went to get caught up on the local news.
That was before radio or television, and if you really wanted to kind of get out and see people, that's where you go.
And thanks to Augusta's warm and temperate climate, the market was thriving year-round. Local meteorologist Jay Jeffries knows these pleasing conditions have been drawing folks to the area for centuries.
The best part of Augusta weather is that it's continuous. There are 4 seasons across the United States. We have 2 of them. They're called spring and summer. We very seldom have a fall forecast. Very seldom have winter.
Augusta's weather may have played a role in the market's success, but in 1878, a catastrophic storm brings about its demise.
They didn't know how fast it was going, how big it was, how wide it was, how devastating it could have been.
And many believe this twister isn't just a natural phenomenon. As the legend goes, the storm was born from a story of fire and brimstone and a deadly premonition.
A great wind will destroy this market.
And at the end of it, the only thing left standing, the pillar, bears the curse of a madman for generations to come.
For residents, the lone pillar was a terrifying sight.
A great wind shall come upon this town.
A sunny southern town steeped in history, Augusta, Georgia is like no place else. Its tree-lined streets provide the perfect backdrop for stories dating back centuries. But not all of those tales have a happy ending. Such is the case with the legend of the pillar.
It's a story that just sort of lives. It's got almost a life of its own, the story does.
It has some lore about it. You know, local Augusta people like to kind of go down there, bring family and friends down there and tell them the story of the haunted pillar.
The chilling tale of how this lone column became cursed has been passed down for generations. And it's especially poignant for the people of Augusta because it begins just after the Civil War, a critical point in the history of this area.
The Civil War in the South destroyed infrastructure. It destroyed what factories they had. Homes were destroyed. So there was a lot of physical destruction.
It's a devastating time in the South. But Augusta quickly rises as a beacon of hope.
The war itself never came to Augusta. And unlike some cities that had to start by building their buildings over, Augusta did not have to do that. And in some ways, that gave it a heads up on getting going once the war was over.
For Southerners, Augusta is on its way to becoming a new South city.
People in Augusta who were in leadership positions began to talk about, let's industrialize. It'll provide jobs for people. It will bring money in. We'll have goods we can sell.
And one type of good in particular becomes one of Augusta's most valuable exports.
Augusta was a thriving commercial center for the cotton trade.
In addition to the infrastructure for manufacturing and selling cotton, Augusta also has something that money can't buy.
This area is good soil for cotton and the right climate for cotton, so it grew extremely well here.
You have a window from April to October, and our climate during that time is perfect for growing and also picking cotton.
Thanks to Augusta's cash crop, the city soon becomes a booming metropolis.
The population began to grow in Augusta. It was bustling with new things.
And at the center of it all lies the Lower Market, a large building with a Greek portico featuring 4 towering pedestals in front of its entrance. Author Sean Joyner has researched the era extensively and knows that at the time, this was the social center of the town.
The Lower Market in Augusta would have been a busy place because that's where majority of the commerce would come and go throughout the city.
And it's just this backdrop that sets the stage for an encounter that will haunt Augusta for generations to come.
The legend is that a minister arrives in Augusta. It was not uncommon at that time of history that ministers, perhaps of different faiths, would have come into an area to preach the word of God. And on this particular day, he just happened to arrive in Augusta, Georgia.
A perfect stranger. No one knows who this traveling preacher is or where he came from, but he sets his sights on the Lower Market.
He may have chosen this place of market just because of the number of crowds that were there. In fact, in his mind, he might have been referred to this as kind of the proverbial den of iniquity.
With a seemingly built-in congregation, the preacher delivers his message of hell and eternal damnation.
He was a fire and brimstone preacher, unconventional, and had his own interpretations of the Bible itself.
He started to yell, scream at people, began to judge people, began to preach.
From the start, the proud people of Augusta don't appreciate this blight on their city.
People would try to ignore the preacher, but every day he would continue with the same message.
You are all doomed if you reject the word of God. You reject your only possibility of salvation.
He came back time and time again, and didn't have any plans to leave anytime soon, that's for sure.
You reject me.
The preacher's tirade upsets the daily routine of the market, and finally, the people have had enough when he makes an outrageous request.
Then he demanded that people build him a church so that he could preach his gospel in the church.
Realizing he has no intention of leaving anytime soon, the people decide to take matters into their own hands.
They were ready to give him a taste of his own medicine. They rallied against him and physically started to remove him from the marketplace.
According to legend, the preacher leaves, but not before delivering one final sermon.
The preacher, in a great defiance, he walks over to the southwest corner pillar and he places his hand on it and he brings down a curse on Augusta. And he says that a great and mighty wind is going to come and destroy this building. And the only thing that will be left standing will be this one pillar to remind them of their rejection of him and the word of God. And if anybody tries to remove this pillar, they will be struck dead.
And with that, the preacher storms off once and for all, leaving the market goers to believe they are finally rid of his doomsday message. Or so they think.
was just a crazy old man. They probably didn't take him very seriously. It was just a threat, idle threat.
But little do they know, his words will become all too true.
At that time, the Augustans had never seen anything like this before.
And this city in good standing is knocked off its foundation for good.
Something like this, you wouldn't expect it to happen, especially where you live.
It was seeing something unworldly, something that came from the supernatural.
Is encouraged, but it only goes so far. Especially when, according to legend, an opinionated preacher starts causing trouble in their market, the very heart of their community.
He was here to come in and to preach the word of God, and also to demand to the people of Augusta that they build him a church.
And even though he is asked to leave, the preacher continues to return day after day. Eventually, folks have just about enough of this raving revivalist, and they put their southern manners aside.
Augustans decided that they would physically remove him from the city.
But the loudmouth missionary doesn't go quietly. Instead, he sets a curse on the lower market.
The preacher said that a great wind would sweep through the downtown area of Augusta and destroy the market, with only one pillar remaining standing. If anyone touched the pillar or tried to move the pillar, would die instantly.
Even though this premonition was made centuries ago, locals take it seriously today. After all, the cursed relic is the subject of many terrifying tales.
People tell the story all the time. There are a few things in Augusta that are quote-unquote legendary, and the pillar happens to be one of them.
I think everybody's grandparents or parents probably are the first ones to tell you about it. My grandmother actually told me. She was convinced that if you had anything to do with removing the haunted pillar, bad luck befalls you.
Most legends survive because at the end of the day, they're not falsifiable. So we can say, all right, we have some new scientific theories that might explain this, but there's always that piece that says, no, it's still too strange.
Because in the case of the haunted pillar, the legend has been proven over and over again. But it's not just the preacher's premonition that curses the lone pedestal. Legend says his devastating omen actually comes true.
After the preacher brought down his curse, people were glad that he was finished, and they were ready to get back to their normal lives.
Before long, folks are lulled back into a sense of security. So much so that one night when a storm rolls in, no one even thinks about the minister's premonition.
The evening of February 8th of 1878, severe weather started to come into the area.
Augustans wouldn't have been worried. To them, it was just a regular thunderstorm.
After all, they have no reason to believe otherwise. Without modern-day technology, weather prediction is a very different science.
There were a few meteorologists back then, but their methods were totally different from ours. They used a lot of the eye coordinations with the sun, the clouds, the moons, the tides, various things like that. So they really didn't know what to expect.
Without any warning, the people of Augusta proceed as though everything is normal.
And Augustas probably went to bed that evening just thinking it was just a bad storm.
But what they don't know is that this seemingly run-of-the-mill storm is a sign of something much, much worse.
At that time, they weren't naming them supercells. They didn't have names. Knowing what I know now, I would say it was a supercell.
Known as the most severe but least common type of thunderstorm, a supercell is a dangerous combination of weather elements.
It's a system itself that's in the upper atmosphere that allows for updraft and picking up warm air. That warm air contracts and goes into the atmosphere and attracts the colder air. And those two systems just don't like each other, so someone has to win.
And this battle between warm and cold systems usually ends with a violent finale.
Supercells can produce just about anything. The elements of rain, lightning, thunderstorms, or a water spout.
And in the most severe cases, a supercell will bring about one of nature's fiercest events. a legendary occurrence where weather's typically intangible elements actually graze the surface of the earth.
In the early morning hours, just after 1 a.m., a tornado came through the downtown area.
They referred to it at the time as the Great Cyclone.
It was very short, and within a half hour, it had touched down, done its damage, picked back up in the sky, and traveled on and dissipated.
Even though it wasn't on the ground for long, this twister leaves a legend in its wake.
The one pillar that was left standing is the exact pillar that the preacher pointed to before he was taken out of town.
And this artifact of destruction still plagues the people of Augusta to this very day.
There are people that you run into that have had things that have happened to them based on recent contact with the pillar. Yes, it definitely does hold up to its name.
They told me not to touch it, and doctors never gave me any explanation of what was wrong with me. It was just miserable the whole time.
Are you gonna touch it?
I'm not gonna touch it. He's gonna touch it. I'm too scared to touch it. I don't want to die or have like bad luck or anything like that, so.
I think you should do it. We can do it together.
I'll put my hand on your hand. I was gonna put my hand on the back of your hand. All right.
How do you...
Tempting the fate of the pillar is a time-honored tradition in Augusta. And these defiant souls often learn the hard way that this relic still bears the curse set upon it centuries ago. Legend says, back in 1878, after a preacher predicts a deadly storm, one arrives on the doorstep of the picturesque southern town of Augusta.
The evening of February 8th of 1878, the severe weather started to come into the area. It began to rain, thunderstorm.
Most folks think it is just a passing disturbance.
The people of Augusta would have been to bed as usual. There was nothing more than a bad storm outside.
But what looks like a harmless thunderstorm is actually the beginning stages of a rare and powerful phenomenon.
Shortly after 1 a.m. in the morning, a tornado touched down in Augusta.
The storm rips through the city before people have any idea what's going on.
Imagine that you're in your bed and you hear a rumble. The wind is picking up. You're now starting to see the pitter-patter of raindrops on your window. Then all of a sudden, a rush like a freight train coming through, a big, massive noise.
And in the pitch black, people are even more clueless to the devastation going on around them.
It's more deadly during the middle of the night because you cannot see the path or how wide this is or how big or is it touching down yet.
While no one can predict a tornado's path, we do know what causes this severe weather event.
In simple terms, a tornado is looking for an element of warm air and cold air. When the two air masses have met, only one is going to win. And so you have a slight rotation. The warm air is dropping along with the colder air, and that's what creates the funnel.
Not all tornadoes touch down, but those that do typically don't last long.
Tornadoes have a tendency to be on the ground anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour, with a path of about 5 miles long, 2 miles wide. The Great Cyclone of 1878, it stayed on the ground about a half an hour.
Augustans are shocked, especially since storms like these are a rare occurrence in densely packed cities.
Tornadoes love to build on flat land, farmland, and open space, because there's nothing to steer it away and nothing to stop it from building.
But this tornado doesn't play by the rules, and as a result, it changes the face of Augusta for good.
The storm went down in history. People have written books about it, and everybody has their analogy of what actually happened.
But what everyone does know is that this deadly funnel has done irreparable damage.
The touchdown of the tornado was directly on top of the market itself.
The next day after the storm, people gathered in town to see the destruction of what had happened. And when they arrived to the area where the market was, they found that the market itself, it was a complete ruins. A lot of buildings have been destroyed around it. But what was so unique about this particular incident was that the only thing that was left standing visibly was the pillar itself.
Sadly, the Great Cyclone claims more than just the lower market that night.
There were 2 people that died in the cyclone, and they were the parents of 5 children who lived in a house that was nearby where the initial destruction happened.
As folks stare in disbelief at the lone post still standing amongst the wreckage, they are reminded of the incident at the market.
Whoever touches this pillar.
The people realized that the curse that the preacher had set on them was becoming reality.
How else could this one column remain when all the others were demolished in the storm?
For residents, the lone pillar was a terrifying sight. How could that preacher have gotten this prediction right? Was he right about the rest of his premonition? You would actually die if you touched it?
From there, the monument earns its first name, the Pillar of Prophecy.
Since then, there's been stories of people touching the pillar or trying to move the pillar who have died instantly.
Few dare to test this curse, but those that do become the stuff of legends. Even though the relic is a liability, folks in Augusta know better than to get rid of it.
There's been plenty of opportunities through these years to literally take it away. But this legend is so strong, the people of Augusta, they won't tempt fate.
We often go through life negotiating possible dangers or ill effects. And so someone who maybe doesn't see themselves as believing in the supernatural may still, with this idea of a curse, say, it's not a whole lot of skin off my nose, let me just play it safe.
Which most folks seem to do. Until the 1930s, when one of Augusta's most respected residents puts this curse to the test.
My grandfather's name was John Henry von Sprecken. He was a businessman. He was a mover and shaker here.
But most people around these parts know John Henry as a devoted family man and a stalwart Christian.
He was a pillar of the church, the Lutheran Church of the Resurrection. He was an elder there, very much involved in that church.
With a successful career, a growing family, and the respect of his fellow man, John Henry has it all.
They had a very storybook existence. They had everything. They wanted for nothing. They had all kinds of things.
But he sets his sights on a prize that money cannot buy, a piece of the haunted pillar.
I think he just liked the idea of having something that was sort of a local legend, having a little bit of ownership of it.
So when John Henry learns of a car accident that causes some damage to the pillar, he gets an idea.
There were bricks strewn about, and he was the kind of guy that would like to have gotten bricks as souvenirs.
And so this member of Augusta's elite takes a slight detour past the column on his way to church one morning.
I don't think he was one to tempt fate very much. He just didn't believe in it, poo-pooed it, and just thought it was just legend.
But all that changes when he puts this piece of folklore to the test.
After my grandfather picked up the brick, he went on to church. It was just a normal Sunday day for him. Didn't think a thing about it. He was sitting with the family, probably with his cousins. They had their own pew by that point.
I will destroy this market.
He felt faint and actually fell over. Just keeled over, so to speak.
And John Henry von Sprecken's brush with this cursed artifact will serve as a warning to anyone who doesn't believe in its power.
He died believing in the curse.
Everyone in Augusta knows about the legend of the haunted pillar. Most folks leave it alone. But even then, this blighted relic has been known to bring undue suffering upon this southern town.
The intersection here makes up for about 39% of the accidents in the area, as well as 37% of the injuries based on the accidents. It is high for this area. This is a very low speed area, 25 and 35 mile an hour speed limits, and to see that amount of injuries in such a low speed is unusual.
Over time, strange occurrences taking place around the column have become a dime a dozen. There are more stories than folks can remember. But the one that really sticks out is that of John Henry von Sprecken back in the 1930s.
My grandfather was pretty well respected in the town. He was a good guy to know. He was a friendly fellow and was considered one of the leaders of the church.
And his story is as well known as he is around these parts. After taking a few pieces of the damaged column, John Henry heads to church. And it's here that the curse of the pillar sets in.
My grandfather was sitting in the pew at church, and he felt faint and actually fell over. They say that he fell out, is how they put it. The first thing he said when he woke up was, "Take the bricks back. Let's take them back now." Because he was afraid that the curse was coming true. In his mind, the bricks were the cause of his problem. He sensed the connection right away. He thought fainting was a warning that he shouldn't have done that. The bricks were returned and he came back to health. Everything was back to normal.
It doesn't take long for word to spread about John Henry von Sprecken's close encounter with Augusta's most dangerous monument.
This is a small community, so probably everybody knew. It had gotten around town very quickly.
Eventually, the column is repaired, but John Henry continues to warn others with his story, believing wholeheartedly that for a brief moment, he had suffered the curse of the haunted pillar. Having survived this encounter, some residents in Augusta start speculating the column's curse might not always result with a death sentence.
So legends shift. Initially, when the legend is told, the retribution for getting near this pillar is death. It's fairly dramatic. But as people have touched it or tried to move it and haven't died, people aren't irrational. With that evidence, they are adjusting the legend so that it does seem to actually make sense. And so now the repercussions of touching it are far milder.
But the legend still stands. And as it turns out, the lesser version of this monument's wrath is still the force to be reckoned with. Augusta resident Josh Danheim is about to find this out the hard way.
I've lived in Augusta for 3 years. The Army has brought me here. About 2.5 years ago, my mom came to visit us, and we went to the museum. We saw a pamphlet at the museum about the haunted pillar, and we noticed that it was right down the road from us. I didn't really believe in the legend. I just thought it was a bunch of nonsense. But my mom wanted to see it before she left, I guess. When we got there, I thought we were at the wrong spot because it's just a pillar. If you didn't know what you were looking for, and even then, you might not even see it. They told me not to touch it. I was like, it's nothing to the story. It's an urban legend. So I touched it. I rubbed all over it.
And that's where Josh's story begins. Like many others before him, he soon comes face to face with the frightening powers of this relic from the past.
I have never felt like that before. Never. Never had anything like that happen.
Augusta knows that the haunted pillar can cause death or illness.
I wouldn't want to touch it just because I don't need anything bad happening in my life.
The relic has been wreaking havoc on Augustans ever since a traveling preacher cursed the column that once stood in front of a bustling marketplace.
And he says that a great and mighty wind is going to come and destroy this building. And the only thing that will be left standing will be this one pillar. And if anybody tries to remove this pillar, they will be struck dead.
And when a deadly tornado strikes the center of Augusta, decimating the marketplace and leaving just one pillar, folks wonder if the prophecy was real.
The people realized that the curse that the preacher had set on them was becoming reality.
As legend has it, since that day, the pillar that stands at 5th and Broad Streets has caused numerous deaths, car accidents, bad luck, and grave illnesses. Augustan Josh Danheim can attest to the powers of the pillar. He experienced them firsthand.
We saw a pamphlet at the museum about it, and we noticed that it was right down the road from us, so we decided to go check that part out. My wife and my mom was just like, oh, we're not going to touch it, and I kind of laughed at them a little bit. They stayed away from it. I think they might have taken a couple pictures of it, but I kind of got a little goofy and I started rubbing all over it. I was just being silly with it.
No, don't touch it. We're done.
After we left, I put it out of my mind and didn't even think about it. My mother left town, and then I started getting pretty sick. It just kind of hit head on, came on strong. Coughing, sore chest, just it was pretty bad. I'd cough and I'd cough and I'd cough so much and so hard that I ended up vomiting. I have never felt like that before. Never had anything like that happen. And when I started getting sick, it didn't even cross my mind that it was a pillar. And then probably about a day or two after I started getting the initial symptoms, I started getting the fevers. I decided I needed to go see somebody. Doctor didn't know what was wrong with me. He said if it doesn't let up by next week, come see me again. So that went on for 6 weeks. It just stayed the same every day. I got sent home without a diagnosis all 6 times.
Without knowing what is wrong, there's nothing doctors can do.
Great wind will befall you.
I thought I'd done a couple times. The fever got so high that a couple times I started hallucinating. Once I was sitting on the couch, and according to my wife, I started laughing.
Honey!
And she like, what's so funny? And I told her, our cat's tail just ran across the floor. I think she got a little worried that day.
When Josh finally makes the connection to the pillar, the curse seems to loosen its grasp.
I started wishing I hadn't touched it. And one day it just stopped and I was able to breathe. I realized right away I was better.
There is no way to know for sure what brought on the mysterious illness. But Josh will never question the pillar again.
I would tell anybody, don't touch the pillar. You can look at it, stand next to it, take a picture with it, whatever you want, but don't touch it. I will never touch it again. You couldn't pay me enough money to touch it again. Nope.
It's not just those who come into contact with the cursed monument that suffer its consequences. Many believe just being in the vicinity of the relic can cause trouble.
We opened up a shop right in front of it, and within the time that we opened, we had a fire next door that shut us down for about 3 months, and we had the big winter storm where we all lost power about 5 or 6 days. So after that, I just had to move, and business got better.
It's stories like these that keep the legend of the pillar going from generation to generation. And despite its danger, the monument still draws crowds.
It's almost arcane. There's a danger to it. And of course, with that comes a romantic quality to some people.
And its story serves as an important lesson for the people of Augusta.
I think at the end of the day, this legend is about intolerance and the repercussions for that intolerance. So this itinerant preacher may have been annoying. He may have been, making people feel quite uncomfortable, but sort of unceremoniously ushering him out of town, the legend kind of suggests that the repercussions for that is a major storm. So I think this legend is a critique, really, of past behavior.
Whether or not the preacher was able to conjure the tornado and curse the pillar left standing in its wake, no one knows.
History and memory and mythology are intertwined in ways that sometimes make it very difficult to unwind them.
But there is no doubt that this tale is reminiscent of other historical sagas.
The kind of retribution that happens is right out of the Bible. That a prophet of God is treated poorly, and then there's divine sanction that wipes out entire races of people. It's a far smaller kind of retribution, but it's very much in line with how we see a kind of a divine justice.
And from a weather perspective, its wake of destruction seems almost supernatural. How else could a rare and unpredictable weather event follow such a specific path?
It almost seemed like the cyclone was aiming right for the marketplace.
But not all of Mother Nature's secrets can be revealed.
There are a lot of myths and unexplained weather patterns and systems across the United States.
It seems these mysterious weather phenomenons will always raise questions no one can answer. That is, until the legends that follow help residents fill in the gaps.